Hello. Uh, today, uh, okay. Today, Professor Mark tell us that because she considered that she joined the online classroom in United States, he considered the internet Wi-Fi quality maybe not so good, so he take a video first, then he will join the discussion later. So we can see his lecture video first, so that the Wi-Fi quality problem won't affect your listening. So we can listen to the Professor Mark's video first. And she will join us later because last time his computer, his Wi-Fi quality is not very stable. So he tried a new way to give a better quality lecture.
Well, good evening, and it's our second.
Can you hear the voice? Okay.
Time getting together, and I look forward to talking more about social interest as we talked about a couple weeks ago. In addition to talking about social interest, we're going to talk about a couple related topics to it. Lecture should be about 45 minutes or thereabouts. And then after the lecture, there'll be a short break. And after the break, we'll have some discussion questions I'll be posting during the lecture. And I'll be asking those questions. And I would like as many of you to participate as possible. So that would really be good so that I can get a chance to understand what you're thinking and how this is relevant to you and not. And I only know that if we have an opportunity to discuss it. So again, thank you very much for being here, and I look forward to our discussion in a few minutes. So this is recorded, and I'm going to take one break during the recording, and that way the file won't be too large. And then we'll start a second half of it. So we'll probably go about 15 or 20 minutes and then take a very short break and do the second half of the video. Okay, so tonight's agenda is we're going to review social interest. So a couple of the items that the PowerPoint slides are similar to what we had 2 weeks ago. And just to kind of get another feel for what social interest is about. And then I'm going to give a short lecture on empathy. We'll be coming back to empathy later in the semester during the term. But before that, I want us to understand a little bit about what empathy is, how we can be empathic. And then, of course, the important question is how can we help our students to be able to be empathic as well. Then there'll be a short lecture on the concept or idea of critical thinking. And then we're going to tie critical thinking and empathy into what social interest is. And then we'll have an opportunity for some discussions and then to understand the assignments. Okay, so this is exactly the same PowerPoint slide that I used a couple weeks ago. So in general, this is how we define social interest: a genuine concern for others. And this is where being empathic comes in. And we also talked last week about belonging. And so as a teacher, there's a lot of things that you can do to really make this happen. This is this genuine concern for others. So if you model that, and if you have a classroom that is showing this, then there's a really good chance that your students will be able to appreciate and really thrive throughout their life, no matter where they're at, if they can, in fact, establish a sense of social interest. So it's defined as genuine concern for others, a cooperative approach toward life. In other words, looking for opportunities to cooperate, not just criticize or not just be apathetic toward, but actually ways that we can cooperate. So a cooperative approach towards our life, and also striving for healthy community. So community can be defined anything outside yourself, which would include family, but then outside the family, the larger neighborhood, maybe the community in which you work, maybe the community in which you recreate. But at any rate, your contribution and striving for these healthy communities. Social interest is more than a word, feeling, or concept. It's the idea that everyone has value, everyone belongs, and everyone is equal. And again, this is exactly the same slide that I used a couple of weeks ago. So I hope in that 2 weeks since we talked about social interest last, that you've given it some thought. You've tried to kind of understand how much social interest do you have? What's the nature of your social interest? How do you want your social interest to be increased? Because we said that there's a healthy relationship between social interest and major to healthy human functioning. So social interest is the major key to healthy human functioning. Also, according to Adler, social interest is a critical factor for mental health. Also, social interest eases the sense of isolation and loneliness. There's been a lot of chatter on the internet for the last maybe couple years, really including the beginning of the pandemic, and then beyond that, about how social isolation and loneliness are deteriorating quality of life throughout the world, and particularly for people who are older. So this concept or this idea of belonging and social interest will ease the sense of isolation and loneliness that the way our world is going has created a lot more opportunity for that isolation and loneliness. So social interest is a way of easing that and giving us a way of belonging and participation. And then we also talked about a couple of weeks ago how low social interest, the consequence of low social interest includes destructive behaviors such as substance abuse and addiction. It's also theorized, these sorts of afflictions has been theorized to stem from a lack of social interest. And I definitely see that in the people that I work with who are addicted to drugs and alcohol. Deficits in social interest diminishes ability to experience a sense of belonging and empathy toward others. So again, if we can increase social interest, then the sense of belonging, the sense of being a part of something bigger than ourselves, this ability to be empathic, understand, and appreciate others is a very positive consequence. So if we can have the social interest and encourage social interest, and again, it starts with yourself. The more that you understand the concept of social interest and the way to demonstrate social interest will definitely assist you in these being more part of society and having a healthier viewpoint. So this was in a book. My wife was the first author, Julia Yang. I was the third author, and this was part of chapter 2. And in that particular chapter is a fairly extensive discussion of what social interest is that includes this particular figure. And if you look at the top right, that's the goal. There's high social interest, and there's the high social interest is because of high cooperation and contribution. So when we're thinking about social interest, we should be thinking about these two axes, the ability to contribute and the ability to cooperate. When our ability is high in both of these areas, then that's going to be a pretty good indicator that our social interest is also high. And that's the goal. We may be somewhere in the middle currently. Certainly, I grew up in a very individualistic society, although I did learn early on to appreciate how cooperation with each other, teamwork, working as a team is really something that I gravitate towards and appreciate. And I think on years in the United States Navy, my participation in athletics on athletic teams, all to me was a way of being able to contribute and to cooperate. However, let's go beyond these very specific things like being on a team or being in a military situation. How can we cooperate and how can we contribute in everyday life? And I think this is one of the questions that you need to be asking yourself. And how so is this going to help you in terms of your mental health and your ability to accomplish the tasks that you want to and goals that you want to achieve? So this is a question that we have to be thinking about: is how can we demonstrate more social interest in our life? So we'll come back to this discussion question a little bit later. But you have been exposed to this idea of social interest 2 weeks ago. And so we've had a couple of weeks to think about what social interest is. What are your thoughts? And to help form your thoughts, think about these two specific questions. In everyday life, do you often see social interest at work? In your everyday life, do you often see social interest at work? Or if you don't see social interest at work, what do you see? I think that's a question that I'll be asking in our discussion period here in a little while. So try to give specific examples of when you do see this in everyday life. And then the other question, which I did ask a couple of weeks ago for us to consider, what are the impediments to social interest? What are the obstacles? Why might it be difficult in some situations or some environments to be able to show social interest? What are those impediments? So that will be the discussion question that we'll be talking about during our discussion period in a few minutes. Okay, empathy. Empathy. Well, let's just go to the slide. I think that might be easier. So first of all, what is the relationship of empathy to social interest? I think the relationship goes both ways. When a person has the ability to be empathic, they definitely have the ability to show high social interest. Doesn't mean that they are, but they have that capacity to do so. On the other hand, when a person is not very empathic, when they aren't too concerned with others, how others feel, other situation, things of that nature, their social interest most likely will be relatively low. So there may be another factor that's contributing to both of these, but there is a relationship between empathy and social interest. So I'm suggesting that the more we can teach our students or the people that we have responsibility to work with, if we can help them to be more empathic, I think that's a route, a very logical route towards helping them to increase their social interest. As I said a couple of weeks ago, belonging is important to social interest, and empathy is critical for both belonging and social interest. So as the way that I kind of see this is, if we can establish in ourselves a way of being empathic towards others, that gives us a way of belonging. And that also gives us a very through line to be able to express and understand, appreciate, and then benefit from social interest. So the relationship, I think, is fairly clear, the relationship between empathy, belonging, and social interest. So a definition of empathy is this. Empathy is the experience of understanding another person's thoughts, feelings, and condition from their point of view rather than from our own. So I think most of us, when we experience life, definitely get or understand that our point of view is our point of view. Now, we sometimes give kind of lip service to saying, oh, yeah, everybody has a point of view and everybody should respect that point of view. But when that point of view is different than your own, can you still say that? Can you still be respectful? And so I think it doesn't matter what the point of view is of the other person. If you can experience another person's thoughts and their feelings, then that point of view is pretty easy to understand or to maybe not agree with, but appreciate. So our point of view, we can't project or overlay our point of view on others. It's inappropriate. It's not fair. And so the opposite of imposing that point of view is then to understand the point of view of the other. And I think in this world that we live in currently, it's very difficult. I just turned 70 fairly recently, and I can remember in my 30s and my 40s, the world was considerably different. There was less anger. There was less skepticism. Yes, there were conspiracy theories even back 30, 40, 50 years ago. There's always been conspiracy theories. But I think the conspiracy theories were, for a majority of people, it was understood as that. It was just the idiosyncratic viewpoint of another. And it wasn't harmful. It wasn't something to be angry about. But nowadays, it seems that if my point of view and your point of view are different, then we're supposed to be angry at each other. And I think it's tearing the world apart. I know the country that I live in, the United States, is not the country I grew up in. And there's a lot of things that are happening that are fairly negative. Yes, there's great opportunity. And yes, Americans in general are very easy to get along with and very helpful. But at the same time, there's a whole lot of this anger that's based on, if I don't agree with you and you don't agree with me, then we can't even look at each other without being angry. So this understanding from another person's point of view, I think, is needed more in society now than it ever has been. And we, in the teaching and helping professions, I think we have a great opportunity to be able to model what empathy is, to be empathic, to encourage empathy in our students with each other, and be able to model empathy towards our students or the people that we're working with as well. So adhering empathy, and we mentioned in terms of social interest, we saw 2 weeks ago that from an adhering perspective, this quote here, to see with another's eyes, to hear with another's ears, to feel with another's heart. So empathy, I think, is a very important concept to be able to understand the nature of your empathy towards others. How can you increase it? What's the importance of it in your day-to-day life? These are the types of things that I think when we start asking those questions, then I think we have access to understanding social interest and the sense of belonging And we'll be talking about these concepts throughout our time together this semester. So there's plenty of evidence that empathy happens very naturally, even in babies, young babies, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. There's been some good studies, published studies that show how empathy is basically innate. It's natural. It happens for very good reasons. We have to remember that as a species, as a human species, we are survivors. We have survived to be able to be born and to exist in this world. We've had to survive eons of evolution and change. Empathy is one of those that has come through in this entire time frame. So empathy probably was very key in the beginning of interactions of people with people, and how they chose to cooperate to survive. So if empathy is innate, then why don't we see it more often? And it's because it hasn't been nurtured. So even though empathy is innate, it must be nurtured. And I think if we understand the importance of that, that's a very good way of beginning to move towards the ultimate goal of being able to have a higher social interest. Empathy is also cultural. Individualistic, judgmental, competitive, and self-centered societies send conflicting messages. So in a society such as the United States, and even more so in Taiwan, where there's a lot of competition, it's a meritocracy, meaning it's a society based on merit. So when there's a society that's based on merit, there's a lot of competition and a lot of judgment. I was talking the other day with some friends of mine, and I had been in the military for 21 years. And truly, the military is based on merit. The better you perform, the more likely you'll be promoted, you'll get good assignments, you'll be given opportunities and things of this nature. The people that aren't performing, those things happen less and less and less. So in societies like this, empathy isn't very highly regarded. So there is a cultural component to empathy, meaning that in societies that are individualistic, like the United States, judgmental, comparative, and self-centered societies, they tend to send very conflicting messages. So be thinking about your society. I know most of you probably haven't lived in other cultures other than Taiwan. Maybe some of you are. Maybe you're like me. I'm a resident of Taiwan, but I'm not a native of Taiwan. And so I tend to have an opportunity to compare the society I grew up in and the society that I've existed in, which has been Taiwan. And there's certainly some differences. There's more similarities than differences, but there are differences. And so that's what we have to be thinking. I can't tell you how to demonstrate empathy. As an example, one of the discussion questions that I'll show you in just a minute, that we'll be talking about a little bit later, is how can we demonstrate empathy? And so one of my go-tos is I know I'm being empathic when I make eye contact. And in my culture, I know what appropriate eye contact is. But appropriate eye contact may be different in Asian culture in general, and specifically in Taiwan. So we have to decide, you have to decide, based on your culture, what are some appropriate ways of being able to demonstrate empathy? But more importantly, how can you help the people that either you're teaching or you're working with? How can you help them to understand the cultural component of empathy as well? It may not be a natural, it's certainly not necessarily natural in American society for empathy to be highly regarded or highly valued. But I think as people understand more about the problems that we're facing in the world and as societies, all the conflict and the anger, that empathy is in part of the answer. So again, empathy is very important contribution to social interest as well. Okay, so some prerequisites for empathy include the ability to accurately self-reflect, being open-minded, and having a non-judgmental attitude. Now, all three of these are not necessarily easy things to do. And we're going to talk about each one of them just very briefly. So the ability to accurately self-reflect. What this really means is that we're pretty comfortable with who we are. We have a pretty good sense of who we are. And so therefore, our relationship with others comes from a place that we know who we are. So we're not trying to fit in, or not trying to be manipulative, but we're trying to be genuine when we express empathy. However, if we don't have that ability to self-reflect, our empathy is not going to be, it's not going to seem genuine, and it won't be accepted as being genuine. So a prerequisite to empathy is that we have a pretty good sense of who we are and that we know how to self-reflect. Obviously, being open-minded is another important prerequisite to empathy. It's hard to be closed-minded and show empathy for those that are very different than ourselves. I can remember in my early days living in Taiwan, there weren't that many Americans. And I lived in some areas of Taipei that there weren't that many Americans. So oftentimes I would be stared at. And so if I keep an open mind about that the reason I'm being stared at is because then I'm not going to feel negative about that. I'll be able to warmly smile, warmly make eye contact, but that requires me to be open-minded to be able to do that. So that open-mindedness is a very important component of empathy. And then very related to open-mindedness is a non-judgmental attitude. I think most of us, I've been teaching on the university level for about 30 years, and my students all agree with this. I don't know that there might be a couple that didn't agree with this, but in general, human beings tend to be very judgmental. And I think this is probably also related to evolution. If we didn't have a judging attitude, then we probably wouldn't be able to survive. So we do have to make judgments. However, what do we do with those judgments? That's the key. And empathy is a way of kind of tampering down our judging attitude so that we're not missing the important essence of what that person's about. So when we're being judgmental, we're diminishing that person. So at this point, one other quote. This is a quote, and I'll just read it, and you can kind of see and make some sense of this when we, I'll bring this back up when we get into our discussion a little bit later. Making Caring Common Project released their report, and the report said, in part, the children we mean to raise, the real messages adults are sending about values. Many parents and educators, myself included, were surprised to learn that despite all of our talk about instilling character and empathy, kids may value academic achievement and individual happiness over caring for others. In the report, the authors explained that the children's values reflected what they believe adult values. So there's several things that this quote is saying, but one of them, and I think this is probably very accurate for most children that are being raised in competitive societies like Taiwan or Korea or the United States even, that when kids are very focused on academic achievement and individual happiness, their caring for others tends to be diminished. So I think we have to counter that. And I think the way that we counter it, if we're a classroom teacher, we have excellent opportunities to counter this message. In other words, yes, you should be rewarded for merit. Yes, you should, your academic achievement will yield a great amount of happiness. However, if that can be coupled with a caring attitude for others, then that happiness won't be empty. And this we see in adults all the time. They achieve their goals, they're successful, they're making a lot of money, and yet they're terribly unhappy. Why is that? Part of the explanation, most likely, is because they were so competitive, they didn't take time to be able to appreciate and be with and understand the importance of others in their lives. And so that emptiness came at the cost of their success. So it's something to think about. Okay, so this will be the discussion question that we'll be talking about a little bit later. What are ways that you feel comfortable being empathic? So think about what we've been talking about, what empathy is, and be able to answer this question. What are ways that you feel comfortable being empathic? Okay, so we're going to take a short break at this point, and when we come back, we'll be talking about critical thinking. So
老师，你没有开麦克风。
Hello, students. We are going to share some brief opinion about this discussion question. So we can have a short break here and bring your opinion back probably 30 minutes later. We will discuss these problems in the end of the lesson. Okay, so let's have a short break here. We can take a break for 10 minutes and come back at 9 10. Okay, see you later.
Miss Professor said, I think it's 8:10, is it? Because now it's only 8 p.m. Is it 8? Because I might have.
Oh, yeah. We will come back at 10 minutes later.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Hello, 嘉荣、新宇，好。
有。
你们可以把你们想要讲的先打一下，就是打中文，然后再从那个用那个 ChatGPT 把它翻成英文，这样子，这样就可以了。然后待会你们也要说哟，可以吗？
可以。
可以，你们会用 ChatGPT 吗？
老师，他最近不太好用欸。